After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people, get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I'm about to give to them, to the Israelites. I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon, and from the great river, the Euphrates, and the Hittite country, to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors to give them. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Keep this book of law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. So Joshua ordered the officers of the people, go through the camp and tell the people, get your provisions ready. 3 days from now, you will cross the Jordan here to go in and take possession of the land the Lord your God is giving you for your own. But to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, Joshua said, remember the command that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you. After he said, the Lord your God will give you rest by giving you this land. Your wives, your children, your livestock may stay in the land that Moses gave you, east of the Jordan. But all your fighting men ready for battle must cross over ahead of your fellow Israelites. You are to help them until the Lord gives them rest, as he has done for you, and until they too have taken possession of the land the Lord your God is giving them. After that, you may go back and occupy your own land, which Moses, the servant of God, the Lord, gave you east of the Jordan towards the sunrise. Then they answered, Joshua, whatever you have commanded us, we will do, and wherever you send us, we will go. Just as we fully obeyed Moses, so we will obey you. Only may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. Whoever rebels against your word and does not obey it, whatever you may command them, will be put to death. Only be strong and courageous. The end.
The beauty of that, Lily, is you had no idea how long that was going to go for, but you did make it to the end. Well done. Okay, so we're starting this new series in the book of Joshua, the Old Testament book, and this is actually going to be one of our main sort of sermon series for the year, and we're actually going to cover the entire book. It's going to be quite a long series, but we're going to kind of break it up with a few one-off sermons here and there to sort of mix it up a bit as we go. And as we kind of launch into this, you'd probably be forgiven for asking, why Joshua? You know, you might be thinking, yeah, it's good to look at the Old Testament now and then, but that's a pretty big book, Keith, and a lot of it sort of seems like ancient history. A big chunk of it describes divvying up the land. It's sort of like writing out the details of a map, not exactly interesting reading. How on earth is this book going to be relevant to us today? On top of that, if you know Joshua, you know it's a book that contains a lot of war and conquest and violence. You know, it's a book actually that many atheists point to and say, you know, God is love, isn't he? But how can he be love when he seems to orchestrate this genocide? It's also a bit of an awkward book because it's talking about conquering the land. And that's pretty awkward given the current, Palestinian-Israeli crisis in that same place. This is the book where it all starts, where Israel first enters the land. So you might be asking, why Joshua? But despite all these things, and in some ways even because of these issues, I think it's going to be fantastic to look at this book together, look at Joshua together. I think it's actually really helpful for us to wrestle with the violence and the conquest and the land and, what does all that mean today? We need to get this stuff straight in our minds. And as we look at this and as we look actually at all that this book contains, I'm confident that we're going to see that it's not just a record of history, it's not just historical facts. No, there's actually a message here that the author wants to proclaim. Like all the books of the Bible, Joshua's not just going to inform us, no, it'll convict us. It won't just enlighten us, it'll comfort us. Joshua contains a message that's going to be super helpful for us here at Bay. Now, as we always do when we kind of launch into a new part of the Bible, we sort of need to get our bearings a bit, don't we? We need to ask, where is Joshua? Where does Joshua sit in the wider Bible story? And helpfully, it starts in verse 1, chapter 1, saying that we're after the death of Moses. We soon discover we're at that point where the nation of Israel has just finished wandering in the desert for 40 years. They're now standing on the eastern banks of the Jordan River, about to enter this land that God had promised. Remember, God had promised it all the way back to Abraham, Genesis 12. God had promised three big things to Abraham. He promised land and people and blessing. There was this land, the promised land that he'd set aside for them. They were going to become a great nation, a great people, and that nation would be a blessing to others. Now, at this point, they're already actually a great people. There's about 600,000 men, plus women, plus children. They're already a people, but they're waiting to enter this promised land. Remember, Moses had been leading them, but he'd failed as their leader, and God had prohibited him and his generation from entering the land. Remember, they got kind of spooked out by what the spies saw when they were having a look into Canaan. And so this means now there's only two people left from that original Exodus. Only Joshua and another one, Caleb, one of the spies, are left. The rest have sort of forfeited their inheritance. And so that's the scene. Here's 600,000 men, plus women, plus children, waiting to enter the land. And so let's look at this opening chapter. Let's see what's going to happen. And we're just going to see three big things from these initial verses. And the first of which is that it's now time to receive the gift. Look at verse 2. What does God say to Joshua? He says, "Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River and into the land that I am about to give to them, to the Israelites. I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses." Twice there we read that God is giving them the land. And throughout chapter 1, actually giving gets repeated 8 times in the chapter. God calls their land their inheritance. See, what's really clear is that Israel's not going to earn this land. Israel's not going to win this land for themselves. It's not a reward. No, it's solely a gift from God. Then in verse 13, Joshua reminds the people that this land is also going to mean rest for them. He repeats what Moses had said to them. He says, "The Lord your God will give you rest by giving you this land." Rest is this settled and secure life that God is giving them. Life in the land flowing with milk and honey. Life that's finally away from being in slavery, finally away from wandering in the desert. And I'm going to play my cards early here by saying that this picture of Israel being given this gift of land and victory and rest is actually just a foretaste of God's people entering the final kingdom. Israel heading into the physical land, establishing a physical kingdom, actually just points to us Christians entering our heavenly kingdom. You see, Israel, their land, is actually just a shadow of what was to come. You know, John 14:2 is a well-known verse. It's where Jesus says, "My Father's house has many rooms, and I am going there to prepare a place for you." And he's not talking about a hotel in Jerusalem. No, he's talking about his heavenly kingdom. The ultimate location for God's people is not the Middle East. But still, them entering this land, that's still very significant. And it's significant because it's actually fulfilling this long-awaited promise by God to them. The description of the land he's going to give them as well, it's big, it's expansive. Look at verse 4. It says, "Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon, and from the great river, the Euphrates, to the Hittite country, to the Mediterranean Sea in the west." And if you look on the map at where these places are, you actually realise that Israel never actually manages to succeed to getting this whole area, securing this whole area. You know, we know they get to the Mediterranean Sea, but they don't get all the way west across to the Euphrates. They don't get all the way up to where Lebanon was in that day. And so this already gives us a bit of a sense that the final kingdom hasn't arrived. It's still coming. They're going to take some of the land, but not all of it. Why will this happen? Why don't they get all the land? Well, it's a product of their unbelief. You know, compromise and comfort are going to take over. You know, they're going to actually end up missing the vast dimensions of God's grace, and they end up settling for what was for less than what was on offer. But still, regardless, God will do with them in the land of Israel what he does with them there. Actually gives us a taste. It gives us a taste of what's meant to happen in the entire universe. And the first important thing to note with that, as we've already said, is that this is going to come as a gift, not a reward. They're not getting this land because there's something sort of amazing about them. You know, and as we're going to see that through the story, it's not them who's going to go win the battles, it's always God. Now, we'll move on in the story in a moment. Yeah, but for now, isn't it actually just good to be reminded yet again that it's not up to us? You know, God's grace is always a gift. You know, how many times this week did you feel like a failure? How many times this week did you make a stupid mistake? Well, remember, God's gift is still waiting for you. You know, he's promised you a place of rest and security and victory, and that's not dependent at all on your performance. It's by faith alone. You know, he's going to come through with that promise. His inheritance that he's promised us is sure. It's never going to perish, spoil or fade. It's always God. It's always a gift. Don't forget that. Now, the next question then, though, for those on the banks of the Jordan is kind of around how they're going to get there. You know, how is it that they're actually going to receive this land? God said, hey, I'm giving you this land, but how's it going to work? And that leads to the next important point, which is that they're going to need to follow the leader. You see, what becomes really clear in this chapter is the role that Joshua is going to have to take in bringing them to the land. You know, in verse 6, God says not to the whole Israelite community, no, he says it to one person only, to Joshua specifically. He says, be strong and courageous because you will lead these people to inherit the land. More literal versions of the Bible, the ESV, for example, word it even stronger, saying, you shall cause the people to inherit the land. And so this means that Joshua, I think, has been placed into a very important but very intimidating situation. You know, for starters, he's just taken over from Moses. You know, Moses was that great and incomparable leader that Israel had had. You know, the book before this, Deuteronomy, the last verse finishes with the words, no one has ever shown the mighty power or performed the awesome deeds that Moses did in the sight of Israel. Tough person to follow. You know, I think it's a bit like King Charles has had a tough job trying to follow on from the Queen. And on top of that, what's right there before Joshua, standing between him and the land, is a raging river, a river that's in flood at this point in time. Behind that river is the hostile, pagan worshipping inhabitants of the land. They're not exactly going to welcome them with open arms. And then behind him, what's Joshua got behind him? He's got a motley bunch of desert-dwelling descendants of slaves. They're not exactly an ideal fighting army behind him. Joshua has been entrusted with kind of fulfilling this kind of crucial part of the God's promise to Abraham, and he must be just quaking in his boots. It can only be seeming like a tough mission. No wonder God says to him, be strong and courageous. God also specifies in verse 7 that he's also to be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Now that's no small task either, to obey the law completely. We sort of say it in an offhand kind of comment, obey all the law, but have you actually read Exodus, Leviticus and Numbers, all the laws that are in them that Moses gave to the people? We start to see this is not just a tough mission for Joshua, this is mission impossible. Except when we notice verses 5 and 9, they sort of bracket around this section, because they say, verse 5, as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I'll never leave you nor forsake you. Or verse 9, do not be afraid, do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. You see, the reason why Joshua can be confident is because God is with him. The apparently sort of impossible task is actually made possible by God's presence. Moses died, that the baton's been passed to him, but Yahweh has not changed. And Joshua 21:45 is kind of the theme verse for the whole book. It sort of summarises what happens. And it says, not one of all the Lord's good promises to Israel failed. Every one was fulfilled. You see, Joshua can be strong and confident, not in himself, but in the God who is with him. The God who always comes through with his promises. As we'll see in a moment, I don't think we should come away from this passage with that sort of application of, I need to be like Joshua. I need to be strong and courageous like him. We tend to pretty quickly sort of moralise the Old Testament in that way. Joshua's not just an anyone in the Bible story. He's a someone. But yet it's interesting that we still, as just everyday, plain old Christians, we're also promised God's presence. Jesus says in Matthew 28, surely I will be with you to the very end, until the end of the age. We're also given God's actual presence by his Spirit within us. And so while we're not called to be like Joshua, we can actually still have strength and courage because God is with us. And no matter what you see coming before you this week or the kind of train wreck that you see behind you of what you've done in recent times, we can have utter confidence in our good God. Whatever thing you're facing this week, be reminded God is with you. He will never leave you or forsake you. What a beautiful comfort that is. What a balm for your soul. Now, as I've alluded to though, I think the main point of Joshua as a leader is not someone that we try and replicate. Instead, it's actually just to show us the type of leader that we need to follow. The leader who's going to be able to bring us to that promised rest. And it's so telling that the name Joshua and Jesus are actually the same thing. Joshua in Hebrew gets translated as Jesus in Greek. They both mean God saves. Which actually means, by the way, the title of this book we're going through could also be Jesus, not just Joshua. Probably another good reason to study it. And as we start to see and start to think about Joshua as just being a leader that points us to the greater leader, Jesus, we realise that Jesus also faced what seemed like mission impossible. He faced the horror of the crucifixion. He faced the almighty task of conquering evil, the task of having all our sins on his shoulders. What strength and courage did Jesus need for this task? Jesus was also the only one who was truly obedient. Joshua wasn't truly obedient. He didn't stay down the middle. He did swerve to the left and the right. He didn't follow all the laws. Only Jesus kept the laws. Only Jesus was unswerving. Only he could unlock the vastness of God's grace for us. And so while the Israelites follow Joshua, and we're going to track what happens in the story there, we need to keep in our minds we follow Jesus. Joshua led the people into God's kind of earthly, temporal kingdom. But Jesus leads his people into God's heavenly, eternal kingdom. Jesus is the cause of us entering rest. He's the one that we need to cling to. The application isn't be like Joshua. No, it's have faith, cling to, hang on to the leader that Joshua was pointing to, the leader that came after Joshua. Know that actually it's Jesus where you get your true rest, your true life. Following him means you get the gift. Now, at this point, I think there's a risk that we could all take this quite individually. You might say, okay, you receive the gift over there, I'll receive the gift here, you receive it over there, let's all follow Jesus however way it suits us. But the second half of the chapter is a great reminder not just to be sort of individuals as we follow Jesus, but actually there's a whole nation following this leader. And as they do that, they're going to have to be united in purpose. That's the third big thing we're going to see. In verses 10 and 11, Joshua tells everyone to get ready. He says 3 days' time, you're going to cross the Jordan, you're going to enter the land. But then he addresses a subset of Israel. In verse 12, he says, but to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, Joshua said, remember the command that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you. Now, the backstory to this is that in Numbers 32, these 2.5 tribes had requested to occupy the land on the east side of the Jordan. They're like, this land looks good. It looks like a great place for us to settle. Can we please settle here? We're not interested in the west side. And this kind of map shows us the kind of land that they end up occupying on that eastern side. You can see them there. Reuben, Gad, half of Manasseh occupy that spot. But back in Deuteronomy, Moses had commanded and they'd promised that they needed to still cross the Jordan. They still needed to help fight the battle on the west side. The temptation for them would be strong. Let's just stay on the east side. It's good here. But Joshua reminds them, verse 14, your wives, your children, your livestock, they may stay in the land that Moses gave you, east of the Jordan. But all your fighting men, ready for battle, must cross over ahead of your fellow Israelites. You are to help them until the Lord gives them rest, as he has done for you, and until they too have taken possession of the land the Lord your God is giving them. After that, you may go back and occupy your own land. Now, the chapter ends with them confirming that they'll do this, they'll follow this command, and it seems like a little bit of an odd detail to include, doesn't it? But what it highlights is that they're actually going to have to be united in purpose as they take the land. They're going to have to be united as they together follow their leader Joshua. Taking the land is actually going to involve sacrifice and serving each other. Taking the land is going to be a team game. It's not just sort of individuals just sorting themselves out. Their desire needs to be that everyone enters that rest. Everyone enters it together. And so that's important, isn't it, for us as Christians to realise as we head towards our own rest. We live in a very individualistic society. It can be so easy for us to just focus on our own personal walk with Jesus, our own journey towards that rest. But the call is to remember, no, you're part of a wider community. The Christian life is a team game. Don't just sort of settle east of the Jordan and hang out there and forget actually your sisters, your brothers, they need you. They need your support. They need your encouragement. They need you, you need them, as we all collectively follow Jesus to that rest. And because of the age we're in, it's going to probably have to be a bit of a constant corrective for us, isn't it? By default, we're going to be tending to head it alone, think of ourselves. We need to keep course correcting back to thinking, how can I actually help others on this journey? What role can I play as together we follow Jesus as a team? And so that's been quick, but we've reached the end of chapter 1, only 23 chapters to go. What on earth are you thinking, Keith? But let's see as we go. For now, I just want us to pause and actually pray about what we've seen. We've looked at three broad truths, three big truths. And in a moment, I want you just to pick one of these and actually pray about it on your own. Pick the one that's actually been important for you to be reminded of today. Is it maybe for you that you need to pray and thank God and remember again that rest will come for you, but you just receive it as a gift. You don't need to earn it. Or maybe is it that the path to rest actually involves following Jesus? You're not going to get there by some other way. Or is it that you need to be united with your fellow Christians as we head together towards this rest? You need to remember that togetherness of service of others. Or is it some other thing that stood out to you today that isn't one of those big points? Let me give you a couple of minutes. Just pick one. Spend some time either thanking God or confessing, asking God for help in remembering this stuff. And in a couple of moments, I'll close. Let's pray. Dear God, as we start this book of Joshua, it's exciting to see what you did through your people back then, and it's exciting to think what you are continuing to do through your people right now. Father, as we together sit around in this room, you've brought each of us on a journey individually, but we're also collectively heading towards that rest that you promise, that place with you in eternity. I pray, Father, that you'll use this book to teach us and to encourage us. I pray that today there's been a few things that we've been able to take away that's encouraging for us and spurs us on. Father, thank you that you always give us things as a gift. It's not up for us to earn our way to anywhere, but you give us freely grace. Your grace is vast, it's expansive, it's massive. We thank you for that. Father, help us follow Jesus. Help us collectively encourage each other to follow him.